In the dark corners of the galaxy, there are threats that burn with terrifying intensity, like the Tyranids that devour entire systems, or the Necrons who rise from ancient tombs with cold precision. But then there are threats that do not roar, do not shine, do not march with fanfare. They creep, they fester. They are not seen but felt, whispers on the edge of reality, a decay in the corner of the eye. The Hrud are such a threat. They are not an empire, they are not a fleet, they are a shadow, and it is precisely this nature that makes them one of the most chilling enigmas in the galaxy. What if these spectral beings, these decrepit nightmares wrapped in entropy and sorrow, are not aliens at all? What if they are us, broken, twisted remnants of human destiny, staggered into the past by the collapsing waves of their own doomed future? The Imperium speaks of them with contempt, calling them vermin, filth, xenos. But those who have faced them and lived speak with horror, not hatred. They describe the air turning cold, the light dimming, and their own bones aching with age in mere moments. The Hrud do not kill with rage or greed. They simply unmake, and that is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of them. Not what they are, but what they represent. A mirror, a warning, a shiver through time itself. In the sanctioned records of the Adeptus Administratum and the fleeting mentions within Imperial field reports, the Hrud are described with a tone of bureaucratic dismissal, labeled as a minor Xenos infestation, pests more than threats. To the Imperium, they are vermin. Yet even this simplistic classification cannot mask the uncanny dread that trails in their wake. Officially, the Hrud are considered a species of loosely organized scavengers, nomadic Xenos whose presence is marked by decay, stealth, and destruction. They are rarely seen in full daylight, rarely captured intact. Descriptions vary wildly. Some depict them as hunched, cloaked figures slinking through ruins, others as ethereal, semi-phased apparitions with fluid outlines and eyes like dim stars. Every account agrees on one thing. They are grotesquely alien to the laws of physical space. Anatomically, what can be discerned from their mangled remains, when they do not spontaneously decay into sludge, reveals a physiology that defies most xenobiology classifications. Their limbs are long and asymmetrical, their posture hunched, with what appears to be an exaggerated spinal structure protruding from beneath folds of ragged clothing or skin. Their skin, where visible, is described as slimy or mucus-covered, dark and leathery, often seen shifting in hue as if reacting to the observer's perspective. Autopsies are rare and almost always incomplete, as the Hrud body decays at an accelerated rate upon death. Theories suggest this is due to built-in biological entropy, perhaps even an involuntary reaction triggered by their death state, though no one can confirm it. Their presence often leaves a lasting impact on local environments. Mold spreads across steel, organic matter desiccates unnaturally fast, and entire storage bays rot as if aged 1,000 years in a heartbeat. Despite their grotesque form and seemingly primitive existence, the Hrud wield weapons and technology that disturb even the most seasoned tech priests. Their primary arsenal consists of entropy-based weaponry, devices that do not shoot projectiles, but instead project concentrated fields of accelerated decay. These weapons reduce armor to brittle fragments and cause flesh to age into dust within moments. Some witnesses speak of guardsmen aging to death mid-charge, their lasguns crumbling in their hands. These effects are not merely biological, they warp time itself. Vox systems distort, Auspex scans return decades-old echoes, and even servitors cease functioning as if they were centuries past maintenance. The Hrud do not fight to conquer, they fight to erase. Strangely, these scavengers exhibit no signs of conventional societal structure. They appear alone or in loose groups, driven more by necessity than coordination. Yet, when provoked in great numbers, particularly during migrations, they show an eerie synchronicity like strands of a collective instinct. They avoid direct confrontation unless cornered, preferring to sabotage, infest, and rot from within. They live within the shadow zones of derelict ships, underhives, and void hulks. Even space stations assumed secure have found Hrud nesting within forgotten ducts, as if the creatures phase between realities or twist the dimensions to their will. Exterminating them is never permanent. They return like a fungal blight, silent and patient. Imperial scholars debate their intelligence, though many agree it is a mistake to assume simplicity due to their hunched posture and non-verbal nature. Hrud display clear signs of technological adaptation and strategic sabotage. They disable Geller fields, disrupt environmental systems, and target power cores, choices that require understanding, not instinct. They leave no language behind, no glyphs or written records. Their communication, if it exists, might occur through means beyond human perception. Some suspect a psychic network, others propose pheromonal signals or even chronospatial resonance. The ecclesiarchy paints them as living blasphemies, warped by time and the warp alike. Preachers speak of them as demons clothed in decaying flesh, agents of entropy sent to unravel the Emperor's divine order. But Inquisitors are more cautious. Reports have been sealed, missions classified, and even the Ordo Xenos admits that there is more to these beings than infestation. If they are vermin with purpose. And that purpose, cloaked in shadows and entropy, may be tied to truths the Imperium dares not utter aloud. There are few phenomena in the galaxy that can rival the terror and silent devastation wrought by a Hrud migration. To call it a military action is to misunderstand it entirely. It is not an invasion. It is not conquest. It is entropy made manifest, a creeping wave of rot and temporal collapse that engulfs entire worlds not with fire or steel, but with decay and silence. When the Hrud migrate, they do so as a tide, a shuffling, barely perceptible exodus that passes through reality like a slow-moving cancer. Planets that lie in their path wither, not in metaphor but literally. Cities crumble as if aged centuries in days. Crops blacken, water evaporates, metal corrodes, and memory itself becomes unstable. Whole archives are found rewritten or blank. Time is not merely distorted, it is devoured. The first signs of a migration are often dismissed. Machine spirits become sullen and inert. Auspex readings fluctuate. People report feeling cold, their reflections behaving oddly, and objects from their past appearing out of place. Then, the sickness begins. Men and women fall ill with inexplicable symptoms: aging skin, brittle bones, confusion about current dates, memories that belong to no one. Medicae stations report bodies collapsing under the weight of decades of wear and hours. Chrono-instability is the first true sign that the Hrud are near, and by the time this is understood, it is often too late. Witness accounts from the few planets that survived the fringe of a migration speak of entire cities shrouded in shadow fields, bathed in a perpetual gloom that no sun can penetrate. Survivors describe the Hrud appearing from within walls, emerging from folds in space, or rising from the ground itself. They move slowly, in great numbers, draped in robes that seem to trail the passage of time. And they do not engage in war. They simply pass, yet everything in their wake is affected. Starports collapse, hive towers lean and crumble. Ancient ruins, previously untouched, erode into sand. The effect is so extreme that even orbiting ships are not immune. Geller fields destabilize, internal clocks become erratic, and systems shut down without warning. The Adeptus Mechanicus once attempted to study a minor migration in Sector Pirellis by deploying data probes and servitor cathedrals equipped with protective void shielding. They vanished. What little data was recovered before loss suggested that the probes had recorded events that had not yet happened, images of cities already in ruin before the migration began, log entries written in future tenses, and a final transmission marked with a timestamp 3 centuries ahead of the current date. The tech priests declared the sector quarantined and labeled the Hrud phenomenon as a chronotoxic anomaly. Their archives were sealed under Red Tab. The horror of these migrations is not limited to physical destruction. They inflict psychic and existential damage on populations. Astropaths go mad, screaming of multiple timelines converging. Dreamers report walking through future ruins of their own cities. Children are born old, and some people vanish entirely, only to reappear months later, dazed and broken, aged beyond recognition. In one infamous case on the moon of Kellern 6, the entire governing council died in their sleep on the same night, their bodies mummified as if having died of extreme old age. Autopsies revealed cellular degradation consistent with subjects over 2 centuries old. Inquisitorial accounts, those not burned or redacted, speak of even stranger phenomena. Clocks reversing, voices from nowhere uttering familiar names, structures made of materials unknown to the current age, but bearing Imperial heraldry, and most disturbing of all, recordings showing individuals interacting with Hrud and seemingly conversing, only for those individuals to later deny the event and die days afterward from spontaneous system collapse. One agent theorized that the Hrud migrations are not just spatial events, but temporal corrections, cleansing points of entropy across different timelines that threaten the stability of reality itself. There are records of entire worlds being declared exterminatus targets simply to halt the spread of a migration, not because of enemy resistance, but because of the unknown, because of fear, because when the Hrud pass through, they do not simply erase life, they erase history. And for a galaxy that defines itself through unbroken millennia of war, the thought of being forgotten, of being unmade, is perhaps the most unbearable fate of all. The enigma of the Hrud begins and ends with silence, an utter absence of history, a gaping void where a timeline should be. Unlike the Eldar with their ancient songs, or the Orcs with their fragmented war myths, the Hrud possess no oral traditions, no etched monuments, no ruins that scream of a past age. They appear as if conjured by entropy itself, drifting into the galaxy without a past to anchor them. For the Imperium, this is not just troubling, it is existentially offensive. In a civilization obsessed with the cataloging of history, even to the point of dogma, the idea of a race that has no origin, no record, no root, is akin to heresy. Imperial scholars have pored over ancient data vaults and lost codex logs in search of some precursor, some link to a time or place that could birth the Hrud. They find only contradictory hints. A reference in a pre-Unity Terran document speaks of shadow things seen in the irradiated zones near Siberia, creatures described similarly to modern Hrud, but attributed to warp ghosts or post-nuclear madness. A log fragment from the earliest Mars expeditions speaks of temporal distortions and figures appearing out of phase with the red dust storms. The Great Crusade's explorator fleets logged at least 3 encounters with entities that match Hrud characteristics, yet classified them under entirely different designations. There is no clear line, no first contact. It's as if the Hrud have always existed, always decaying, always hidden, slipping between the cracks of cause and effect. This absence of a clear origin is fertile ground for theories, many of which strain the boundaries of sanctioned thought. One fringe hypothesis posits that the Hrud are not a natural species at all, but rather an effect, a symptom of a galactic disease rooted in time itself. Some inquisitors have theorized that the Hrud are temporal scars, echoes of failed futures or collapsed timelines, coalesced into a form that barely maintains cohesion. These creatures, they suggest, are not born. They are discarded, congealed from the entropy of decisions never made or histories unfulfilled. Even more disturbing is the notion that the Hrud once were something else, something human. This theory, whispered among radical elements of the Ordo Chronos and certain outcast tech priests, implies that the Hrud are the remnants of a human civilization that transcended time, only to be shattered by its paradoxes. Perhaps they are what remains of a long-lost Dark Age experiment in temporal manipulation, a failed attempt to escape the warp by rewriting causality. If this is true, then the Hrud are not Xenos. They are us, broken and dissolved across centuries, returning like a fever dream to haunt the paths we thought abandoned. Another theory, darker still, claims the Hrud were created deliberately. Not by the Old Ones or the Necron-Tyre, but by something else, something that dwells outside time. According to this interpretation, the Hrud are not travelers through time, but anchors. Chronoleeches birthed to fix or consume specific moments in history. Their migrations, then, are not random but targeted. Worlds that are erased by their passage are not simply victims. They are casualties of some grand re-editing of the timeline. Events or discoveries that never should have occurred, snuffed out retroactively by the passage of the Hrud. And then there is the theory no one wants to contemplate, the theory that is neither exotic nor profound, but painfully mundane, that the Hrud are simply old, far older than the Imperium dares admit, older than the Eldar, older perhaps than the war in heaven, a civilization so ancient, so worn down by the tides of time and entropy that it has forgotten itself. A people whose purpose, name, and culture have crumbled until only instinct remains, to migrate, to survive, to exist in shadow. This interpretation does not comfort. It terrifies, because it means that no matter how glorious a civilization may be, how technologically advanced or culturally rich, all things fade, all things rot, and the Hrud are simply what remains. This gaping hole where history should reside is not an accident. It is a wound. A cosmic silence that howls across the stars, defying the very structure of the Imperium's truth. They are the void in our data, the missing word in a sacred chant, the face we glimpse in the crowd and forget by dawn. The Hrud are not just elusive, they are wrong, wrong in a way that history cannot contain. And that might be the most terrifying truth of all. To understand the Hrud is to understand that time is not a constant. For them, it is not a line, not a sequence of cause and effect. It is a playground, a shackle, and a weapon. Among the most disturbing traits attributed to the Hrud is their apparent mastery, or perhaps symbiotic relationship, with chrono-phase instability. This phenomenon, at first believed to be a form of warp taint or residual Geller distortion, has proven far more insidious. Where the Hrud walk, time folds, it decays, it unravels, it bleeds. Reports from those who have encountered the Hrud in combat or during the early stages of a migration are bizarre in their consistency. Weapons degrade mid-use, food rots in sealed containers, wounds age into scars moments after being inflicted. But beyond these biological effects, there lies a deeper horror, time as perception collapses. Soldiers forget where they are. Memories mismatch with surroundings. Squad mates speak with voices that belong to long-dead ancestors. Some remember dying. Some remember killing themselves. All report that the Hrud seem unaffected, gliding, robed through the entropy storm as if it were the most natural state in existence. The tech priests of Ryza once deployed a time-locked observation cogitator to record a Hrud encounter. Encased in a triple-layered stasis vault, immune to ambient chrono shift, it returned data so incomprehensible that it was declared unsanctioned heretical tech by Mars itself. It recorded events out of order, firefights that began before the Hrud appeared, dialogue before questions were posed, scenes of men being aged into dust before their first breath was captured. The final entry was a mirror image of its own creation, evidence that time itself had looped during the event. The vault was jettisoned into the sun, and then there are the entropy fields, the most commonly observed Hrud weapons. These are not energy beams or physical projectiles. They are zones of accelerated decay, distortions that compress centuries into seconds. These fields move with the Hrud, or are generated by devices resembling coiled relics from a long-dead civilization. Victims caught in the radius dissolve into husks, steel bends like overused parchment, and even plascrete foundations turn to brittle dust. Theories suggest that these weapons operate on the principle of induced localized temporal collapse, artificially aging objects and organisms by flooding them with accelerated time. But not all effects are so immediate. some are residual. After the Hrud move through an area, the space itself seems wounded. Vox echoes carry long-dead voices. Lights flicker to rhythms of past conversations. Doors creak in synchronization with footsteps long absent. Entire barracks remain haunted by temporal echoes, replaying battles that never occurred. One notorious site, Fort Geldrain, was abandoned after every attempt to reclaim it resulted in personnel reappearing weeks later, insane and ranting about events hundreds of years in the future. No time travel occurred, no warp jump, just presence of the Hrud. There is speculation among the Ordo Chronos that the Hrud do not manipulate time as an external force, but exist in a state of perpetual chronophase. In this theory, they are beings stretched across timelines, fragments of potential selves collapsing into a single point for the purpose of interaction. To us, they appear hunched and blurred, robed and shrouded, but that may be our perception grappling with a multiplicity of their forms. They are out of sync, partially present in dozens of timelines, leaving trails of causal disruption in their wake. If this is true, then their migrations are not movement across space, but recalibrations of time itself, waves of entropy designed to repair some shattered flow we cannot comprehend. Some rogue psychers believe the Hrud aren't just agents of entropy, they are entropy, sentient manifestations of the universe's final truth, that everything ends, that all things fade, that time is not a river, but a draining pool, and the Hrud are merely the silt at the bottom, stirring as the galaxy draws closer to its final night. It is perhaps this, more than their weapons or their migrations, that renders the Hrud so utterly terrifying. They remind us that time, which we so desperately seek to master, will always master us. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where even immortality is a cruel joke, there are few truths more horrifying than the realization that the past is not dead. It simply hasn't decayed enough yet. It begins with a whisper, an uncomfortable idea passed between inquisitorial agents and radical tech scholars, that the Hrud are not aliens, not truly, that beneath their withered skin, behind the entropy cloaks and the rotting shadow, they are human, or rather they were, once, long ago, or perhaps not yet. The theory cuts deep, deeper than any bolter round or psychic scream, because it doesn't just challenge the Xenos classification. It shatters the illusion of human permanence. It suggests that mankind's future, some future, did not ascend, did not thrive, did not hold fast against the long night. Instead, it broke, it withered, it turned in on itself. And the result is the Hrud. The notion is not without basis. Many accounts of Hrud physiology, though warped and degraded, contain unsettling echoes of human form, bipedal structure, vestigial fingers, eye placement. Even the hunchbacked silhouette, while grotesque, feels like a cruel caricature of humanity burdened by millennia of pain. Could this form be a result of degeneration rather than alien design? Could the temporal instability they bring be not a weapon, but a side effect, an affliction born from existing across fractured timelines? Some whisper of genetic memory, buried deep in the Hrud's warped DNA. Analysis of deteriorating tissue has revealed, on occasion, fragments resembling ancient human gene markers, fragments that should not be there. The Adeptus Mechanicus is quick to dismiss these as contamination or faulty sequencing. But not everyone is convinced. One Magos Biologis, later executed for heresy, recorded findings that suggested the Hrud's neurological structure bore uncanny similarities to baseline human children exposed to high warp environments during gestation. She called the Hrud chronological orphans, the remnants of an experiment or a population that had tried to escape fate by moving backward through time. This theory gains traction when we examine the behavior of the Hrud. They do not conquer. They do not reproduce visibly. They scavenge. They migrate. They cling to the underhive and the derelict, like creatures who remember something better, something lost. They strike not to dominate, but to survive. Their entropy fields are not strategic weapons. They are screams, echoes of a future that should not be. The way they vanish from scans, the way they disrupt memories, the way time itself recoils around them. These may not be tools of aggression, but symptoms of a chronologically broken species. And if they are human, what then? The implications are staggering. It would mean that the Hrud are not simply a cautionary tale, but a prophecy. That somewhere, somehow, mankind reached too far. Perhaps in the dark age of technology, our ancestors cracked time itself. Perhaps they tried to escape the warp, to build a haven in some parallel age. Perhaps they succeeded and paid the price. Their descendants, distorted by generations of instability, eroded by time's backlash, return not as saviors but as scavengers. They wear the cloaks of the damned, not out of ritual but necessity, to keep the timeline from rejecting them entirely. It would explain their shunning of light, not because they are evil, but because light reveals truth. And the truth is that they are the unwanted children of tomorrow, burdened by memory and decay. Their refusal to build new civilizations, to record language to form states or orders, what if that's not ignorance, but mourning? A mourning so profound that the very concept of rebuilding is anathema. They remember the golden cities of man. They remember what was lost. They carry it in their bones, in their fragmented memories, in the very dust they trail behind them. The Ordo Xenos dares not pursue this theory openly. To admit it would fracture the Church, destroy the lie of human destiny. That the Emperor's light leads not to salvation, but to corrosion. But in the silence of the black ships, in the void vaults of Terra, there are records, secret observations, genetic cross-matches hidden under layers of encryption. And beneath it all, a growing dread. That the Hrud are not what comes from the stars, but what waits at the end of the road we are already walking. If they are human, then the question is no longer, what are they? But, what did we do? What mistake, what arrogance, what desperate experiment cracked the timeline so deeply that its victims now migrate across epochs, cloaked in rot and despair? What future did we try to escape that was so terrible? And in doing so became it? There is a theory, rarely spoken aloud and never written in sanctioned text, that posits the Hrud do not belong to this galaxy's timeline at all. It is called the Lost Eons theory, and it is not merely heretical. It is metaphysical treason. According to this theory, the Hrud hail from an age that is no longer part of reality, a time that was erased, overwritten, or broken during one of the great galactic upheavals, perhaps even before the rise of the Emperor. They are not visitors from the stars, but refugees from a future, or a past, that was devoured by its own collapse. This is not the same as time travel, nor is it akin to warp walking. The Lost Eons theory suggests something far more disturbing, that history itself is mutable, fragile, and that the timeline we live in is not the only one that once existed. There have been others. Versions of the galaxy where Horus never turned, where the webway was opened, where the Necrons never awoke, where humanity did not fear the warp, but harnessed it. And when those timelines collapsed, whether through catastrophe, paradox, or deliberate manipulation, their remnants did not simply vanish. They bled. The Hrud, then, are echoes of these lost eras. Perhaps they were the survivors of a humanity that ascended, mastering chronospatial movement, only to find that such mastery led to disintegration. Or perhaps they were engineered by civilizations that no longer exist, shaped as caretakers or temporal wardens, and were left adrift when their creators were unmade. In this view, Hrud migrations are not mere wanderings. They are escape vectors, routes away from annihilation, not of flesh, but of time itself. Their tools, then, are not weapons but life support systems, devices designed to phase them through decaying chronologies, to allow them to survive within the hostile timeline of our reality. Their shadow fields and entropy bombs are protective barriers, shielding them from causal rejection. In certain rare encounters, observers have noted Hrud interacting with ancient technology as if they recognize it, machines that predate known civilization, perhaps relics of those vanished eons. In a few cases, they have even been seen protecting such artifacts from destruction, or fighting alongside long-dead human constructs as though honoring an ancient pact. The idea that entire epics could be lost and leave only the Hrud behind is staggering. If true, it means that the galaxy has undergone not just wars, but full-scale reality resets, events so devastating they ripple back and forth across the temporal spectrum, consuming whole timelines. And the Hrud, poor shadows that they are what remains. Not conquerors, not prophets, just survivors. The ash that time itself cannot fully sweep away. Supporters of the theory point to the emotional patterns exhibited by the Hrud in rare psychic echoes, waves of sorrow, mourning, confusion. They do not emanate hatred or malice, but loss. Profound, incomprehensible loss. A psychic archaeoxenologist once referred to a captured echo as a funeral song for stars that never formed. The Ordo Malleus discredited her, of course, and burned her notes. But those who read them before the Purge said she had documented entire visions, dreams of cities built in timelines that do not exist, of wars fought in centuries that never came, of emperors who wore no armor and led no wars. In this light, the Hrud's very existence becomes a heresy not against the Emperor, but against the finality of history. They are evidence that time can break, that pasts can be rewritten, not just forgotten, that futures can be lost, not just unfollowed. And for a galaxy that holds its past sacred, that defines itself by millennia of warfare and struggle, the implication is more horrifying than any Xenos threat, that all of it, all the sacrifice, all the glory, all the pain, could one day be erased, not remembered, not corrupted, just gone. The Hrud do not fight to dominate. They do not speak. They do not build. But perhaps they remember. Perhaps they are all that remains of worlds no longer tethered to reality. Worlds that tried to outlast the inevitable and failed. And in their migration, in their passage through this timeline, they remind us not only of what may come, but what has already been lost, quietly, without a trace. Not with fire, not with blood, but with a whisper of dust and the scent of old, forgotten time. There is a haunting question at the heart of any attempt to understand the Hrud. Are they creatures of flesh, or are they something else entirely? Beings more at home in the immaterium than the materium? The Imperium classifies them as Xenos, and yet their abilities, their behaviors, their presence often defy the boundaries of biology. It is within the veil of the warp that the Hrud begin to make a dark kind of sense, not as psychic entities in the way of Eldar or sanctioned human psychers, but as creatures whose very existence seems entangled with the tides of the immaterium, perhaps even formed in response to it. Hrud shadow fields, their most iconic defense mechanism, are more than camouflage. These devices, or biological abilities for the line between machine and body is blurred with the Hrud, wrap them in a sheath of unreality. The shadow fields bend light, twist perception, and blur the edges of time and space, making them nearly impossible to track or even recall. Some witnesses have claimed that even memory of a Hrud encounter fades quickly, as if their presence was never anchored in linear time to begin with. Others speak of being struck by waves of nausea, vertigo, or hallucinations when in proximity, symptoms more akin to warp taint than stealth technology. These fields are not mere defensive tools. They are filters, lenses that shield the Hrud not just from sight, but from full immersion in a reality that is hostile to their nature. And perhaps more disturbingly, they seem to operate partially through warp manipulation. The fabric of reality bends around the Hrud, not unlike the effect produced by minor warp rifts or unstable psychers. Auspex equipment fails. Psychic defenses flicker. Even null fields don't always work correctly, reacting to the Hrud not with suppression, but with feedback. Some theorize the shadow fields are a primitive form of localized warp nullification, while others believe they are warp harmonizers, aligning the Hrud to the currents of the immaterium instead of resisting them. Psychically, the Hrud present an enigma. They do not display the active psychic aggression of sorcerers or warp beings. They do not cast lightning or dominate minds, yet their presence is undeniably psychic. Astropaths report background noise, deep pressure waves of mourning, and dream interference when Hrud are near. A few particularly sensitive psychers have collapsed in their presence, overwhelmed by what they described as a tidal wave of forgotten memories and the feeling of being unmade. The black ships have, on at least one occasion, recovered a Hrud corpse that caused psychic nullification in its immediate vicinity, only to discover that it wasn't null at all, but so far outside baseline human cognition that the mind simply refused to process it. There is a growing belief among radical xenologists that the Hrud are not individual beings at all, but avatars of a larger psychic consciousness. In this view, what we encounter in our reality are merely slivers, tendrils of a greater intelligence existing mostly within the warp. This entity or collective uses the Hrud as interface points, its agents or bodies inserted into our timeline to perform incomprehensible tasks. This would explain their lack of communication, their strange, seemingly aimless migrations, and their entropy effects, acts not of malice but of cosmic gardening, pruning timelines, encouraging decay where growth is anomalous. Others believe the Hrud are something even more unsettling, failed psyker species. Perhaps they are what becomes of humanity if the soul decays faster than the flesh, if psychic potential twists inward and corrodes rather than expands. Their migrations might be the psychic equivalent of instinct, drawn to places where the warp bleeds through, like moths to the end of light. Perhaps their cloaks are to protect others, not themselves, from the psychic residue of their existence, a field not of stealth, but of mercy. What is undeniable is that the warp reacts to them, but not with violence. Not in the way it reacts to the Necrons, with hatred and opposition, nor with the seduction it offers to sorcerers. The warp seems to resonate with the Hrud, as if recognizing something familiar. Some radical members of the Ordo Malleus have speculated that the Hrud may even serve some unknown warp entity, not a god in the chaotic sense, but a concept, an idea made manifest. Perhaps entropy itself, a being or principle of cosmic decay that uses the Hrud as tools to maintain the balance between existence and oblivion. If that is true, then the Hrud are not merely psychic. They are elemental, not xenos, not humans, but living psionic equations written into the decaying parchment of the galaxy's final days. They do not merely wield the warp. They are one of its languages, soft, whispering, tragic, and when they pass through, the warp does not scream. It sighs. Within the vaults of the Inquisition, there are tomes that should not exist. Locked beneath hexagrammic wards, written in ciphered dialects long abandoned, they contain truths that no man should seek and no soul can carry. Among them are references to the Hrud, fragmentary, obscure, and redacted beyond coherence. Yet what survives in these forbidden texts, and what is whispered by those who have gazed too long into the entropy-ridden shadows of the Hrud, speaks to a terrifying consensus. The Imperium does not misunderstand the Hrud. It fears them, profoundly. Most common references classify the Hrud under mundane categories: xenos infestation, subsentient vermin, warp-correlated migratory species. But these are masks, layers of bureaucratic misdirection. In the redacted dossiers of the Ordo Xenos, the Hrud are categorized not just as xenos, but as Class Omega contaminants, an inquisitorial designation usually reserved for temporal anomalies, warp existence, or existential threats to the continuity of galactic reality itself. The implication is clear. The Hrud do not just pose physical danger, they threaten the very perception of history. One heavily suppressed document, believed to originate from the Pre-Cadia Schola Cryptologica, details an inquisitor who tracked the pattern of Hrud migrations across 500 years. What she found was chilling. The Hrud did not travel randomly. Their migrations followed no stellar drift or resource path. Instead, they mapped onto a sequence of events, a sequence of suppressions, forgotten wars, and erased heresies. Each world they touched had once birthed forbidden knowledge, lost archaeotech, or unauthorized temporal experimentation. It was as though the Hrud were not wandering, but cleansing. Not predators, but custodians. Even more disturbing are the records found in the archives of the Ordo Chronos, those remnants of a now crippled inquisitorial division tasked with policing temporal corruption. Reports recovered from destroyed chronocrypts speak of Hrud appearing moments before timeline collapses, their migrations heralding retro-causality events and paradox fractures. In one instance, a full inquisitorial conclave was consumed when a Hrud passed through, not killing them but unmaking the events that had led them to exist. The entire conclave, its records, and its agents were erased from time. Only a single data shard remained, a scrambled warning scrawled in blood across its surface. They fix what should not have been. It is not only Inquisitors who have taken notice. Rogue traders speak of entire sectors where Hrud activity is accompanied by sudden changes in historical record. Trade agreements never signed, family trees altered, dynasties lost or inverted. Astartes. Chapters encountering Hrud infestations often report ancestral inconsistencies, gene seed traits altered, histories rewritten, campaigns remembered differently. Even the Adeptus Mechanicus, ever reluctant to acknowledge error, has quarantined whole Forge worlds after Hrud contamination altered the memory cores of their data crypts, resulting in blueprints of machines that had never been designed. Inquisitor Cadrix of the Ordo Malleus, whose works are officially expunged, once posited that the Hrud were not invaders at all, but emissaries, sent by some unknown cosmic force to prevent timelines from spiraling into ruin. In his forbidden treatise, The Shadows That Mend, he suggested that the Hrud migration paths aligned with the emergence of unnatural knowledge, AI awakenings, heretical research, even pre-Imperial time weapons. The Hrud, he believed, were not devourers of reality but its janitors. And he warned, to interfere with them was to invite timeline destabilization. Perhaps the most terrifying accounts are those that hint the Imperium itself has used the Hrud. There are blackened records of clandestine operations in which isolated worlds were seeded with Hrud attractors, technological beacons emitting decaying chronal signals. These worlds, soon after, suffered Hrud incursions. Nothing remained. Not the cities, not the cultures, not the memory. The slate wiped clean, the experiment erased, the tool used, entropy incarnate. That the Imperium would stoop to such methods is abhorrent, but understandable. The Hrud are a scalpel no one dares to hold, yet no one can destroy. They cannot be bargained with. They do not respond to diplomacy. They phase through bullets, rot plasma bolts in midair, and dissolve fleets without lifting a finger. And so the Inquisition watches, records, suppresses. It calls them vermin to the public and gods to each other. In every vault, on every black shelf, the message repeats, do not investigate, do not engage, do not remember. Because the Hrud are not merely dangerous, they are editorial. They are history's own immune system, activated when time itself becomes infected. And in the war-torn cathedrals of forbidden truth, the Hrud are not spoken of in fear, but in reverence, as ghosts, as cleaners, as the quiet hand that erases mistakes from the margins of time's grand manuscript. There's a terrible sadness woven through the enigma of the Hrud, a grief that lingers like rot in the foundations of a forgotten city. It's not just their withered appearance or the stench of decay they carry like a funeral shroud. It's the silence, the hollow rituals, the absence of culture where there should be pride, of language where there should be memory. And this has led many among the Imperium's more contemplative fringe to a deeply unsettling question. What if the Hrud once had a culture? What if they once built, sang, created? And what if all of that has been lost, not by cataclysm, but by the slow and relentless collapse of purpose. In this interpretation, the Hrud are not simply scavengers. They are the last echoes of a society that has forgotten how to be itself. Some ancient trauma, temporal, psychic, perhaps even spiritual, shattered their sense of continuity. Not a singular event, but a chronic affliction, a cultural wasting disease that eats not the body, but the soul. It would explain the haunting way in which Hrud act, not out of aggression or ambition, but as if bound by compulsions they no longer understand. Their migrations like instinctive pilgrimages, their entropy fields like breathing, automatic, unconscious. What remnants of culture they possess are pitiful. Strange glyphs scrawled on forgotten walls, always incomplete. Patterns in their movements suggesting ritual, but with no visible goal. In one case, a team of xenoanthropologists reported finding a Hrud hovel deep within the underhives of a hive world, decorated with crude sculptures of impossible geometries. They appeared to shift subtly when not observed. Within, they found a dead Hrud curled around a metallic object inscribed with ancient Terran numerals, 1011, a binary code, perhaps a memory, perhaps a name. The idea that the Hrud might be experiencing civilizational dementia is not without precedent. Humanity itself has forgotten more than it remembers. The dark age of technology left relics and knowledge that even the Mechanicus cannot replicate. The Eldar, once godlike in mastery, now skulk in fragments of their former glory. Why should the Hrud be different? In fact, perhaps they are simply farther along that same trajectory. What we see is not their natural state, but the terminal phase of their history. A culture collapsed into entropy, a people that mourns its own memory. Biologically, too, the Hrud appear unstable. Their forms shift, not just in cloaking, but in anatomy. Genetic drift has reached such extremes that even members of the same migration can differ wildly in structure and physiology. Some are tall, some stunted. Some move like mist, others shamble like beasts. This variation is not adaptive, it is degenerative, a collapse of consistency. It suggests a population under endless environmental strain, exposed to too many timelines, too much warp, too much entropy, a species dissolving, and yet they cling to existence. That, more than anything, is their most human trait. They endure, they migrate not to destroy, but to continue, to survive in the only way they know how. The cultural rot that defines them is not their choice, it is their curse. If they are human, or were human, or even once dreamed as humans do, then their state is not monstrous. It is tragic. They are the result of a future where meaning failed, where time betrayed memory, where continuity could not hold. Imagine it, a once glorious people who bent time, perhaps even the warp itself, to their will, who saw across centuries and forged a way to exist beyond the cage of mortality, and in so doing, broke everything. Their past fragmented, their future collapsed, and now they drift, not as conquerors, but as the unburied dead of a civilization that lost the thread of its own story, not forgotten by others, but by themselves. Even the way they react to light, shunning it, folding away into darkness, is symbolic, not of evil, but of loss, of shame. They hide from what they once were, because to remember it would be to break completely. The entropy they wield may not be a weapon, but a form of suicide slowed to an endless crawl, a means of dismantling the galaxy so that it mirrors the broken tapestry of their own minds. And if this is their fate, if this is what awaits all civilizations that reach too far without anchoring their souls in something enduring, then the Hrud are not monsters. They are warnings, living cautionary tales, walking tombs of memory and ruin, and every step they take is a dirge, every migration a silent funeral procession across the bones of time. The technology of the Hrud is as enigmatic as the beings themselves, half artifact, half enigma, all decay. It is not merely alien in design, it is offensive to the senses, to the laws of physics, to the order upon which the Imperium prides itself. Yet, for all its strange, rust-cloaked mystery, there is something oddly familiar about it. And that is what troubles those who study it most. Not that the Hrud wield such technology, but that it might not be Xenos at all. It might be ours, forgotten, distorted, lost in time and rot. At the heart of this speculation lies their most infamous weaponry. Entropy-based devices that do not destroy through force, but through age. These weapons corrode armor, desiccate flesh, and melt machinery by accelerating their decay to impossible speeds. And yet, they make no sound. They emit no light. They do not burn or blast. They unravel. They cause systems to fail, not because they are damaged, but because they reach the end of their designed lifespans in seconds. This is not heat. This is not acid. This is the crushing weight of time itself. The Mechanicus has long been obsessed with these entropy weapons. Recovered fragments, usually heavily decayed, have been sequestered in red zone vaults and studied under extreme caution. Some magi claim the internal workings are a form of chronotronic engine, not entirely dissimilar from the long-lost chronodisplacers once rumored to have existed during the dark age of technology. Others believe the devices are warp-linked, utilizing localized time distortions drawn from the immaterium. But here's where things become dangerous. A few surviving pieces have shown construction methods eerily similar to ancient Terran manufactorum standards. The alloys used, where they can be isolated, match no known Xenos metallurgy, but correspond loosely with pre-Imperial forging techniques. The devices are often bound in coils that resemble fusion core conduits. Energy signatures, where recorded, show unstable decay curves consistent with artificially induced quantum disruption, a technology that, according to some black archives, was being explored by human scientists before the Age of Strife silenced Earth for centuries. If the Hrud inherited this technology, then it suggests they did not create it, but were once part of a civilization that did. Perhaps they were human. Perhaps they served humans. Perhaps they were the unintended byproducts of human experimentation, like servitors cast into the time stream, abandoned when their function outlived its purpose. Their mastery of decay would make sense in this context. They were not designed to destroy, but to clean, to break down failed structures, to recycle the remnants of technological ambition gone awry. Now they do so without understanding, or worse, remembering too well. There are hints of other devices too, cloaking mechanisms that seem to phase the user partially out of time, black boxes that replay events not from memory, but from parallel temporal streams, artifacts that, when activated, cause nearby observers to experience future visions. The Imperium fears these things, not just because they work, but because they shouldn't. They violate causality. They respond to thought, not input. They whisper in Binaric code older than the Imperium itself, and some of them bear Imperial sigils, warped, inverted, but unmistakable. These findings have led some in the Ordo Xenos to suspect that the Hrud's entropy weapons are not truly weapons at all, but tools, repurposed maintenance devices for a time-sensitive civilization. Perhaps the very concept of battle is foreign to them. When they erase an army, they are not fighting it. They are cleaning it, removing it from a timeline they perceive as corrupted. Their war against the Imperium may not be war at all. It may be exorcism, not an attack, but a correction. There are even darker interpretations. That these devices are not Hrud tech at all, but stolen from some deeper power. That the Hrud, in their migrations, are carrying pieces of a dead god's clockwork, mechanisms meant to sustain a reality that no longer exists. They are not scientists, but carriers, priests of entropy, and every time they use these machines they degrade further, because the devices were never meant for hands like theirs. Whatever the truth, what cannot be denied is this. Hrud technology is not crude, it is not animalistic, it is precise, devastating, and deeply intelligent. But it is also broken, unstable, and leaking purpose. And in that contradiction, we see a reflection, not of Xenos cunning, but of a civilization that once understood time, once tried to command it, and paid the price. A civilization that might have been human. A civilization whose tools now scavenge the stars, wielded by those who do not remember what they once were. Only that the past is poison, and the future cannot be allowed to bloom. There exists a final layer to the enigma of the Hrud, a theory so vast and unprovable that it borders on cosmic theology, that the Hrud are not from this universe at all. Not in the way we understand origin or presence, that they are not merely temporally displaced, not merely time-broken humans or fallen civilizations, but entities from divergent timelines or entirely separate multiversal realities, converging into ours like runoff from shattered dimensions. This theory, whispered only in the most obscure xenotheological circles, is known as the convergence hypothesis. According to this school of thought, the Hrud are not a species in the traditional sense, but a multiversal anomaly, a cumulative echo of timelines that no longer exist, beings that have migrated not across space or time, but across reality itself. They arrive in our galaxy not because of intention, but because this timeline is one of the few that still has gravitational pull, so to speak, a stable enough causal chain to draw in fragments from all the others. The Hrud, then, are not lost. They are homeless. Their worlds are gone, not dead, but unreal. Their existence persists, but not fully. They phase through walls not as a technology, but as a symptom of being only partially real. This would explain their temporal distortions, their entropy fields, their inability to be perceived consistently. If they are refugees from collapsed timelines, timelines where humanity fell, or triumphed, or never existed, then their migration into ours is a side effect of those timelines collapsing inward. They are the byproduct of reality's own editing process, the margins bleeding into the text. And if so, then their very presence is not an invasion, but an infection. They don't consume reality, they leak it. One radical scholar posited that every Hrud is not a single being, but a composite. That what we see when we glimpse a Hrud is a collapsed waveform of multiple iterations of the same entity across different universes. In one timeline, it may have been a human. In another, a machine. In a third, a sentient cloud of data. The Hrud, in this interpretation, are the aggregate soul of all these possibilities, stitched together by entropy and dumped into our universe by multiversal collapse. Their cloaks are not for concealment. They are containment. They keep reality from tearing apart under the strain of their composite existence. Support for this theory comes not from hard data, though Hrud technology has produced chronometric readings that defy baseline universal constants, but from dreams, visions, and psychic residue. Psychers exposed to Hrud for extended periods report hallucinations of alternate pasts, where Terra is ruled by Xenos, where the Horus heresy ended differently, where the Astronomicon never lit the sky. Some describe encountering versions of themselves who made different choices, wore different armor, bore different scars. It is as if the presence of the Hrud weakens the membrane between what is and what could have been. Even stranger are the instances of individuals being replaced. In at least a dozen reported cases, always dismissed officially, always documented secretly, an Imperial subject exposed to Hrud migration did not age, did not die, but changed. Memories altered, speech patterns shifted, familiar relationships soured, not due to trauma, but because the person no longer quite matched who they had been. One theory suggests these were not changed individuals, but overwritten, replaced by alternate versions from other timelines, slid into our reality during a moment of Hrud proximity. The implications are staggering. If true, then the Hrud are not merely survivors of a lost humanity, but custodians, or perhaps byproducts, of a multiverse in decay. Their entropy is not just physical, but existential. They bring the weight of 1,000 unreal histories, and our reality bends under their presence. Their migrations are not coordinated acts, but convergences, clusters of multiversal bleed-through that coalesce into patterns only they understand. Perhaps they are seeking something, a stable axis, a true timeline to anchor themselves in. Or perhaps they are fleeing something far worse. There is a darker interpretation still, that the Hrud are not anomalies, but harbingers, that their appearance in our timeline marks it as next, that just as their home realities collapsed, so too will ours. And when it does, we too will fracture, spread across unreal space, and become them. Not metaphorically, but literally. That we are looking at our future, not of time, but of timeline. A future where the Imperium is not overthrown, but undone. Not destroyed, but unmade. And if this is the truth, then every Hrud migration is a mercy. A warning. A final exhale from a dying universe, reminding us that the line between real and unreal is thinner than a blade of grass, and that even now we may be bleeding into someone else's story. There is a reason we fear the Hrud, and it is not because they are strong. It is not because they bring death, though they do. It is not because they erase cities, twist time, and unravel reality. We fear the Hrud because they are us, or what we could become. They are the walking consequence of our unchecked ambition, our desperate grasp for eternity, our willingness to reshape time and defy death without understanding the cost. In them, we do not see the enemy. We see the aftermath. They are the future abandoned, the path unspoken, the mutation of our most sacred truths. And that reflection terrifies us more than any Xeno's hive mind or mechanical death cult. The Imperium paints them as vermin, but vermin do not echo your prayers. Vermin do not carry relics bearing twisted Imperial sigils. Vermin do not whisper your language in half-remembered tones as they fade into the walls. The Hrud are not other. They are the rot on the edge of the mirror. The smudge that reveals your reflection is already cracking. And perhaps that's the final horror, that their existence, so ghost-like, so thin, is a prophecy, that they are what remains when the wars are all fought, the glories all burned, the records all redacted. Not evil, just aftermath, just the embers of a species that reached too far and fractured into possibilities it could not sustain. The Hrud are not monsters to be destroyed. They are not allies to be trusted. They are the symptom, the bleeding edge, the inevitable entropy of memory and meaning in a galaxy so drowned in war it can no longer remember why it fights. Their migrations are not acts of strategy. They are the final processional of a culture so deeply wounded by time it has become part of the wound itself. And so we must ask, are they truly aliens or time-broken humans from a lost future? Are they what waits beyond the edge of hope, or are they already here, seated in the very DNA of our empire's decay? In the end, the truth may never be known, but the Hrud remain. They pass through the galaxy like shadows from another story, one written in a language we've forgotten, on parchment we burned. And every time they vanish, every time the records crumble and the names are erased, we are reminded that in this grim darkness, even time has teeth. If you've been drawn into the eerie tragedy of the Hrud, the veiled horror of forgotten futures, and the impossible question of what they truly are, subscribe to this channel. There are more shadows to walk through, more forbidden truths to whisper, and more mysteries left to unmake.